Okay, today my guest is Professor J. Barney. I will keep my introduction short to maximize our time with him. In the next 30 minutes or so, we'll talk about Jay as a person. Professor Barney is a thought leader and an esteemed scholar, and finally is a mentor to many PhD students and junior faculty. For the sake of time, I will skip many of his accomplishments and give you a very quick snapshot. Professor Barney is an SMS fellow as well as a fellow of the Academy of Management. Jay has served SMS and AOM at various leadership positions. He also served as editor, editor-in-chief, associate editor in almost all of our top journals, such as Academy of Management Review, Journal of Management, Org Science, SEJ. His work is among the most cited in strategic management, entrepreneurship, and international business. His Google Scholar count is exceeding right now 202,000. I don't know what that even means.
200,000, yeah.
But most of us know him as the owner of high-end sports cars who traded from a Porsche 911 down to a Corvette C8. Thank you, Jay, for joining us.
I don't consider that a trade down. I love my Porsche and I'm enjoying my new bed, I have to admit. Although the idea of me owning a car from General Motors took a while to get used to, but so far so good.
Perfect. Jay, what did you want to become when you were a child?
Well, I was very young. I wanted to be center fielder for the San Francisco Giants, obviously. I mean, that would have been my dream. I spent hours throwing a tennis ball against the back wall of my house in Northern California and catching it just to improve my skills so I could someday play for the Giants. That didn't work out. Turns out I'm not much of an athlete. And then in high school and when I first started to go to college, I thought I wanted to become a lawyer. I had the gift of gab and thought that might be a useful thing to do. I changed my mind, however.
But you're still doing sports. I mean, you do skiing. You're an avid skier.
Sure. I ski in the winter. We ride bikes in the summer, and yeah, we live here in Park City, about 10 miles from the base of the ski resort. So I'm one of those disgusting people who looks out and says, "Oh, there's a cloud today. I don't think I'm gonna go skiing." So it's very nice. It's a very nice situation. I go out for a couple hours during the week, get 5-6 runs in. Most people go to the gym. I go to the mountain and ski. So it's very nice.
How long does a session take for you to get up from your house or from your office, go there, ski, and come back? How long does it take?
2 hours, the whole thing. So that's the drive over, the lifts up, and 6 runs. But these are long runs, so it's maybe almost 8,000 vertical feet. And then I come home and I'm done. So then I work the rest of the day. So
perfect. Yeah. Well, how did you choose academia? What made you choose academia?
Well, when I was an undergraduate at Brigham Young University, I discovered 2 things about college. The first was I liked it. The second was I was good at it. I liked it in the sense that I loved the ideas. I loved being challenged, not just in my major area, which was sociology, but in any class I took, any good class I took. Of course, there was some not that good, but I loved my physics classes and my biology classes, and the ideas and the theories I enjoyed them. As a child, I read the entire Encyclopedia Britannica, so it was just what I did. So college was just like the Encyclopedia Britannica on steroids, and that was great. And then it turned out that I was good at it in the sense that I could take other people's ideas and twist them or apply them in a new way, in ways that generated insights, and that was rewarded in the social sciences, and so that's where I decided to put my emphasis.
I mean, young people won't remember it, but Encyclopedia Britannica or other encyclopedias would come in volumes. They would be like from here to eternity. You would just pick up a book from A to Z.
A to Z, and it was handy. It was really good in the Trivial Pursuit years in the 1980s. I was unstoppable. I had read Encyclopedia Britannica more than once, actually. Yeah, I always knew the answers to the most obscure questions.
Perfect. Something that is not on your CV that others would find interesting about you.
Oh, well, we've talked about my personal hobbies. I am a car snob. I know my wife gives me a bad time about that. So, um, I actually, I won't mention the brand of this car, but I actually sold a car once, not because it was a bad car, not because it was an old car. It actually was relatively new. It just was boring. And I just couldn't deal with a boring car. I think the things that are not on my vita that are really important to me are my faith and my grandchildren. I have 12 grandchildren. I have one in college, another one about to go to college, and my youngest is just turned a year old. So that's a lot of fun. So,
Congratulations. If you stop doing what you're doing today, what is the second best alternative career path? What would you do?
oh, well, I'm getting pretty old for a second career path, but I've always thought that there was a time early in my career when my publications were not happening. I was not having a lot of success getting things out. I was writing at the time, working hard, but not being published. There was a point when I actually contemplated contacting some friends of mine at McKinsey and going into consulting full time, because this scholarly career wasn't working out. I think I could have done that, and I think I would have been successful and reasonably happy doing so. I think it's a hard lifestyle. It's a bit of a challenge. I would always, I love reading biographies. I could have imagined myself being an author of biographies. I have written and published a novel with Trish Gorman titled What I Learned in Business School, How Business Strategy Works in the Real World, where it's a coming of age novel where this young MBA graduate goes to work at a major but unnamed consulting firm, thinking that he understands strategy, only to discover that he doesn't know anything about strategy, at least how strategy actually is created and implemented in real corporate companies. And it sort of goes through his experiences badly misapplying the Porter framework, for example, completely missing the point of resource-based theory, totally not understanding how transaction cost actually works as opposed to theoretically. So and so that was a lot of fun writing that novel. So I mean, I think I enjoy writing, and that would probably be something I would continue to do. Even when I retire, I plan to continue to write.
Jay, you said you were writing, you were working, but you weren't getting published. And obviously something clicked later on. Like, what is that click? What happens that made you get all these 2,000 citations?
Yeah, I think it's, in my first year as an assistant professor at UCLA, I graduated from Yale with my PhD. And in my first year at UCLA, I published a paper in the Academy Management Review very easily. I mean, I thought a simple idea. I developed the idea, simply put it in, got some revisions. And I thought, well, this publication stuff is easy. I was wrong. I went 5 years before I published my next paper. And it wasn't because I wasn't working really hard. I always have had and still have a rule where I try to have at least 6 papers under development at the same time, 2 under review, 2 getting revised, and 2 getting ready to submit is sort of the average I can do. All right, now I have 7 projects that I'm working on that are in various stages of development. So I was working really hard. I think I had 2 problems. One problem was I was still learning how to write in a way that would be accessible to a management audience and yet sufficiently rigorous for my own tastes so that I could do that. And so one of us just learning how to write well for an academic audience. And the second problem was that at the time, most of my work in the early 80s was in strategic management. And at the time, the field was completely dominated by the Porter framework. And my work, even in the early 80s, beginning in 1984, could be characterized as the anti-Porter framework, the resource-based theory. And it turns out that reviewers who were extremely comfortable and skilled at using the Porter framework did not like what I had to say. Part of it, again, was the way I said it. I used to, the original title, one of my papers was "Why Michael Porter is Wrong." Only an arrogant assistant professor would say that. That paper later became the strategic factor market paper in management science. So I had to learn how to write, and then I also had the additional challenge of learning how to break through this the hegemony that existed because of the Porter framework. I'm not criticizing Porter here. I mean, I disagree with Mike on many dimensions, but I'm in print saying that he's had more influence on the field of strategic management than any other scholar ever, because he was the first one to bring an economic rigor, a rigorous economic theory, to the study of strategic management. Before that, strategic management was a mix of goal setting and systems theory, and it was very loose and not very rigorous. But Mike changed that dramatically. There's just no doubt about that. Now, I disagree with the economic theory he used, but that doesn't question the value of applying an economic theory into the field of strategic management. But I don't think it was a click event. I don't think there was like an aha moment. The entrepreneurship literature likes to believe in these aha moments. It was actually the result of 4 or 5 years, 6 years, 7 years of persistence, never giving up, working hard all the time until slowly and surely things began to sort of move in the right direction. In the fall of 1986, I had two papers published in AMR, one paper published in Management Science, and a book published, all in the fall of 1986. So it all happened at once, but it would be not fair to say that, well, there was an insight that I had that suddenly made all this possible. No, those papers and books had been under development for 5 or 6 years, and they just happened to come out about the same time.
Who had the most influence on you?
Oh, there's no doubt that Bill Ochi had the most influence on me as a young scholar. Bill Ochi was a professor at UCLA. I was at Yale with my PhD program, and was not very intrigued by most of the organizational theories that I had been exposed to at that point. And Bill Ochi actually came to Yale and gave a talk, and he gave a version of what became the ASQ paper, Markets, Bureaucracies, and Clans, which was an attempt to apply transaction cost economics to organizational theory. And so he gave this presentation, and if you know Bill, he's extremely articulate and very careful in his words, and he's a great communicator. And I had no idea what he was talking about. But that was good news. Well, there's an intellectual challenge here. Here's a person who's obviously very smart and very thoughtful, and I have no idea what they're talking about. And so that piqued my interest. So I went up to him afterwards and I said, "What should I read?" He said, "You should read Auburn Williams's book, Markets and Hierarchies." So I went to the library. A library, that's the place a building where they hold books. Anyway, I went to the library and I borrowed a copy of Williamson because I couldn't buy it. And I read that book, and it was even less comprehensible than Ochi. I mean, it was like this guy was from Mars. I had no idea what he was talking about. And well, again, good news. And so I spent a lot of time. Well, then when I went on the job market, my dissertation was from my sociology background, mostly social network kinds of things, largely descriptive, atheoretical. But I was fortunate to get a job at UCLA, and that's where Bill was. And then so that became he began to tutor me, or supervising tutoring myself would be a more accurate way of describing it. But he nevertheless was very involved and helped me understand first transaction cost economics, then agency theory, then evolutionary theory of the firm. And then ultimately those things turn out to have a big impact on my thinking. Another person I can't that was extremely important was Dick Ramelt, who was also a professor at UCLA. I never went into Dick's office when I didn't learn something, ever. I mean, he's brilliant and he's challenging, and he was just exactly what someone like me needed. And again, I just learned a lot. One of his papers, I don't think he considers it one of his great accomplishments. I think it's an absolutely brilliant piece of work with Robin Wensley. Was published in 1982, but only in the Academy of Management Best Papers Proceedings. That's all the only place it's available. So it's like this 5-page summary of this paper called "In Search of the Market Share Effect," where they argue that if there's a market for market share, then changes in market share won't be correlated with firm performance, which is just a precursor to strategic factor markets, which is the basis of all resource-based theory. So Dick's work and his intellect was always extremely important for me as a young scholar.
Jay,
Sorry.
what was your best paper, the one that you loved the most? Your baby.
My baby? Well, I think there are two. Can I choose two? I have two. I have 3 kids. Well, I can choose 3. Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
I think my 1986 paper in management science on strategic factor markets. I like that paper a lot. Now, the reviewers were very mixed about it, but 2 hated it and 1 loved it, and it went through 5 rounds of revision and finally was accepted. But the reviewers never changed their mind. But I thought in that paper had at its core everything I've done in strategy since then was implied by the management science 1986 paper. Interesting enough, I didn't understand all those implications until recently. I mean, it's taken me this much time since 1984 when I wrote the paper initially to actually understand all the implications of the theory that was in the paper that I wrote. The second paper is the one that most people would have guessed at, which is the Journal of Management paper on firm resources and sustained competitive advantage. I wrote that paper primarily as an exercise to market the ideas that were in the strategic factor market paper, and I wanted them to be more accessible to management lines. So they're less abstract, less theoretical, more managerially oriented. And that paper is done extremely well. That paper ultimately has enabled the factor markets paper to become more widely understood. But I think most people think the resource-based theory is the Journal of Management paper. I'd say that's one part of the story, but it's not the whole thing. And then I'm actually very proud of a paper I published in 2018 in SMJ titled why resource-based theories model of profit appropriation must adopt a stakeholder perspective. I spent 20 years dismissing the stakeholder perspective and arguing instead for a pure shareholder maximization, about wealth maximization point of view. But as I thought more deeply about what strategic factor markets theory actually implies, it actually implies a stakeholder perspective. I was also confronted with the reality that many of the clients that I was working with in my consulting practice were thinking about stakeholders. And they were either crazy or I was wrong. And so I decided maybe I was wrong. And so that paper took about 3 years to write because I had to unlearn so much of the stuff that I had learned so effectively over the years. And I think it's an interesting paper. I think it has potential to be pretty important.
Interesting. I don't know if you'll remember it. We were picking up something from a church, and we were driving in your car, and you explained your 86 paper to me in your car. And that's the first time I understood it, and it became my dissertation later on. That was my moment of, okay, there's something. Regrets. Have you got any regrets?
Oh, regrets. Yeah, I do. I mean, I think that when I was a young assistant professor, I adopted the notion that the publication game was a zero-sum game. That is, if I published a paper, then someone else wouldn't, or if someone else published a paper, then I wouldn't. So I was all my early work was sole authored. Partly with that was because no one else was doing the stuff that I was doing, so there was no one else to co-author with. But it's also, I just had this aversion to cooperation. What I've learned is that one of the for me at least, an unanticipated benefit of working this career is that some of my very dearest friends are my former colleagues and students. Not just friends in academic, my best friends. I mean, when you work with people like Mike Hitt and Bob Hosselson and Bill Ochi and Dicker Melton and the Ericons,
Thank you.
and people like that, there's a friendship that transcends a paper or a paper project, and it's really quite nice. I remember in those horrible days after 9/11 when all the airports were closed and all the airlines were grounded, and I was home at the time, so I didn't have to deal with it. But I thought to myself, suppose I was grounded someplace, you know, and I couldn't get a hotel. Where would I stay? And I could not think of a major city in the world where I didn't know somebody that I would feel comfortable calling and say, "Hi, this is Jay Barney. I'm stuck here. Can I crash in your living room?" And I thought that was a measure of the depth of the social relationships that have emerged in my career in ways I fully would not have anticipated. And that's been a great thing. So I delayed that in my first years because I thought that this was a dog-eat-dog, fully competitive kind of setting, and it turns out that that's incorrect.
Jay, can we talk a bit more about IB research and
Sure.
the state of the field, the way that you see it? I mean, you're getting an award from the
Sure.
AIB for your contributions to the field with your theory. What are some of the understudied areas, in your opinion? And what's the next 5 to 10 years of the field? What's the next big question?
I don't know. I mean, I'm very much. I know my work has been used in IB, and I have published some things in international business. One of the things my first overseas trip was to Hong Kong in 1982, and then on to Tokyo, where we were doing work with Bill Ochi on supply relationships with Japanese companies. So I was doing international global work from the very beginning. In fact, in some ways, to me, the biggest challenge has always been, I knew I could say, what business is not international? What business is not global? You know, in the early 80s, we saw the emergence of these born global entrepreneurial companies that were, that began on day one and with a global market. And certainly with the increase of impact of the internet, that's becoming even more the case. So, so I've always been aware that international business was a thing, but I never understood it as a distinctive from business. All business is international. So I've always just taken the theories and tools that I've used in strategy and applied those in an international context without, I don't know if that's a contribution to strategy or a contribution to IB. And so that's the way I've always thought about the field. In terms of the next big questions, you know, I have done a lot of work in entrepreneurship recently over the last few years with Professor Sharon Alvarez on the question of where do opportunities come from? And there are two sort of standard models for that, answering that question in the field of entrepreneurship. One is that opportunities are these objective phenomena that exist independent of people that are discovered by unusually alert individuals. And the second is that is the creation perspective, which Professor Alvarez and I have developed, which suggests that opportunities are endogenous to opportunities are endogenous to entrepreneurial action. That is, entrepreneurs act, and in acting, they create the opportunities they end up exploiting. So they're not objective phenomena waiting to be discovered. They're actually actively created by creative entrepreneurs. So if you apply that logic to answering the question, what's the next great question, a research question in the field of international business, I can boldly say, I don't know. It's not out there waiting to be discovered by some unusually clever or alert international business scholar. It's in the process of being created by people like yourself who are doing the work and trying to push the field along and to create new questions and new ways of understanding things. What I can say is what interests me now. That's not the same thing as saying there's a big opportunity out there. So what interests me right now is really thinking through the implications, both theoretical and practical implications of my 2018 stakeholder paper in SMJ. I think that has a huge impact on a whole variety of questions that we struggle with about, like, what is a firm? What are the boundaries of a firm? How are economic profits actually generated? How are they appropriated? These are all core questions in the field of strategy that I think the 2018 paper begins to speak to. It doesn't necessarily answer all those questions, but sure has a way of thinking about them. For example, in the context of international business, the firms that I have seen that treat international business as an opportunity to assemble resources and capabilities from a variety of stakeholders, regardless of their location. I understand there are costs associated with doing that, but taking those costs into consideration, assembling a set of stakeholders who are able and willing to make specific investments in each other, that is a source of economic profits. So I'd like to understand a lot more about how firms assemble these global networks of relationships in ways that lead to the kinds of co-specific investments that then have the potential for generating profits. Like I said, I think there is a theory of the firm there. I think there is a theory of the organization of profit generation there. There's a theory of the organization of profit allocation there. And that's what a lot of my work is now focused on that area.
Perfect. Well, what does your mind think of when it wanders freely in a state of idle curiosity? Where do these great ideas come from? I understand the concept of creation versus discovery. Yes, I do agree. I'm on the creation side, obviously. Where do the ideas come from?
Well, I used to, in the good old days, when I was a doctoral student, I didn't feel like I was having any good ideas. I would go to the Yale Library. The Yale Library is this incredible building. I think it's 12 stories tall. It's called the Cathedral of Learning. It looks like a chapel, a cathedral from Europe. And when I was there, the stacks were open. I don't know if they still are. But the floors where the stacks were not full floors. They weren't 10 feet tall or whatever. They were 8 feet tall, and the stacks went from floor to ceiling. And so when you go and so what I used to do choose a floor randomly, as long as it wasn't a foreign language, like Chinese or something. I would just go into the floor randomly, walk into an aisle randomly. And I would experience what the library was. I had the feeling I was inside a book. It sounds crazy, but there was this dusty, musty smell of all these old books, most of which probably had been taken out in decades. And so that was just a really interesting psychological experience of being inside a book. It's like extends my encyclopedia reading to the next level. And then I would just randomly pull down a book and just start reading it. And you know, scholarship is amazing. I mean, it's just, there is, I learned about how ants navigate across long distances, and it's about pheromones, by the way. And then I actually also read this history of a sort of a evangelical church in the late 1800s that believed flying saucers were going to come down on a certain. I mean, it was just this huge range of knowledge and ideas, and most of which had nothing to do with business or organizations. But I always found that just being stimulated by other people's interesting ideas creates ideas for me in business and management. Nowadays, I don't go to libraries. The Yale Library was special. Most libraries don't have that floor-to-ceiling experience, that being surrounded by a book. Much like offices with books in them. It's too bad. So nowadays, I watch a lot of documentaries. My wife gives me a bad time about that. She says YouTube is your new encyclopedia, and I think that's true. I do watch a lot of interesting documentaries, and I read a lot of biographies. If I'm reading outside of academic work, it's almost always a biography. So I'm right now working on a biography of Ulysses S. Grant. I think a deeply misunderstood figure in U.S. history, by the way. But he's a very interesting fellow.
There's a research in anthropology. They're comparing old world learning, old school learning to new TikTok and YouTube generation. It is the reading a book is different than watching.
Oh, yeah.
And the concept is watching versus reading, and how the brain catches up with the thinking process. And I think it's a lot of is lost in the watching.
In the videos, yeah. When you read, you have to it goes into your brain. You have to imagine or create within your mind what's happening and so I think reading actually is a more intimate form of communication than watching video. Watching video is, I watch YouTube when I have 5 minutes before my next Zoom meeting these days. So because it simplifies things. But good biography. I read a biography recently by Isaacson on Albert Einstein. I don't know if you've read it. It is phenomenal because his intellectual path to having these dominant theories, I can identify with it. I'm not saying I'm Einstein by any stretch of the imagination, but the experience was the same. So I was under the assumption, naively, that Einstein wrote his 2 great papers and published them, and then everyone instantly accepted them. Not so. It took 10 years. And he had to travel, he had to give speeches and get in debates and arguments. Yeah, I understand that. It's very fascinating. Very fascinating to read that. I strongly recommend it.
This brings us to the advice part. What are the common mistakes that you see young scholars do, junior faculty or PhD students, and what to do, what not to do?
Well, again, I'm always reluctant to generalize too much from my personal experience because every career is in a path-dependent way pretty idiosyncratic. But I do see some things that sort of frustrate me or make me sad. And would be better. Frustrate's the wrong word. Make me sad. Doctoral students think that their job is to learn the literature and then to extend the literature. And it is true that in order to do any good work, you have to know the literature. But the essential task is to learn the literature so that you can forget it. That is, so you can find ways to turn it on its head, contradict it, show how it's limited. So much of the work that I read when I was the editor of the Academy of Management Review was just gap filling. These people said A, these people said B, these people said D, these people said F, these people said G. They missed E. We're going to fill in E. Well, it turns out the reason they didn't talk about E is because E is boring, it's uninteresting, or not very important. Most of the work seems to take the existence of these theoretical conversations as given, and then how can we extend them a little bit? Now, I understand you can't make an entire field up by papers that implement radically new theoretical perspectives. There would be too many of them and it would be unworkable. So a lot of work is going to be either theoretical or empirical normal science, that is, testing and extending received theories. But you will never, doctoral students will never be in a better position to make a theoretical contribution than while they're doctoral students. First of all, since you become an assistant professor, you got to teach a lot of classes and you got to be committee meetings and all that insanity. And then also you have to be desperately worried about getting your papers published. And when you have to worry about getting papers published, maybe it makes sense to take more incremental steps because that increases the probability of being published. But when you're a doctoral student, you don't face that pressure. Okay, it's a good idea to get paper published. I understand that. But you also have the freedom, if you're willing to take it, to really think radically outside of the box, to try to redefine the box. And I think it's unfortunate. It's a lost opportunity. I think that I consider myself to be a professional theorist. I have very few empirical papers, but that's very unusual. Most everyone after they graduate becomes an empirically oriented scholar. I'm not criticizing that. That's fine. We need that work. I'm all in favor of those empirical papers, but relatively few of them are really designed to create new theoretical ideas. And the mythology is that's the responsibility of senior professors. Well, senior professors have spent all their career as a professor writing empirical papers that are largely incremental, and you want them suddenly to become great theorists when they get older? It doesn't work that way. In every other field, mathematics, physics, if you have a major contribution by 27, you're not going to. Okay. And I think in our field, that's a missed opportunity for at least some of our juniors.
With one distinction, in math, I think they have 2,000 journals, A-level journals. You got only 2 or 3. So obviously the tenure clock is ticking. That is maybe one of the reasons.
Yeah, but that's why I say the doctoral student is well positioned because, yeah, get your paper published so you can get a job. But you can write theoretical stuff as a doctoral student that may not get published and it won't kill you. Now later on, you have to get published, but you can be more risk seeking as a PhD student, I think, than partly because you're ignorant. Ignorance is bliss. I have a colleague at Ohio State, Jay Anand, who used to have this huge stack of journals on his desk. I don't know if you remember this. A huge stack of journals, all unopened. And I said, Jay, why do you have this big stack of unopened journals? I said, I want to show the students what I'm not reading because I'm writing. I think that's brilliant. That is brilliant. So.
Interesting. For the sake of time, last question. What is one question I should have asked you but haven't?
I think that a lot of people are wondering about work-life balance, and I have been really bad at that. And I think it would be disingenuous to suggest that I regret the decisions I made because I made them with my eyes open and with a clear understanding of what I was doing and why I was doing it. My justification was always that by doing these things, I would be able to secure a good family, a good living for my family, so they would be secure. And all that's true. I'm not just I think that so. But in retrospect, there are times when I probably spent too much time at too many conferences, giving too many speeches. We haven't talked about my consulting. Too many consulting gigs, too much time away from my family. And while I think I had a rich family life, I nevertheless missed some things. And I'm very, very fortunate that my wife was able to more than fill in the gaps. She was able to build a rich, nurturing experience for all of us, not just my children, but also me. I don't, you can ask the question about life balance. I don't have any solutions to the problem because this is a career. If you do it right, it grabs a hold of your brain and doesn't let go. I mean, so I was up at 1 o'clock this morning thinking about how to discuss a figure that is showing that I'm working on a paper with some colleagues right now on experimental strategy and how the best, what language will describe that figure. I mean, come on, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. I should be sleeping, but that's just not the way it works sometimes.
Jay, thank you so much for this great conversation.
No
I
problem.
learned a lot as always, and I'm sure the audience will agree with me. Thank you.
Thank you. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.